Hello and welcome to episode 20 of the Crash and Ride podcast. I'm Patrick Ferguson. I'm your host. Today's interview is with Buick, Audra, and Jerry Rowe of the heavy melodic duo Friendship Commanders from Nashville, Tennessee. I first saw this band when we played together with my band and their band in Asheville, North Carolina, and they absolutely blew me away. Are they metal? Are they something else? I mean, they're super heavy. They're a duo, and I just really, really dig what they do. If this is your first episode of Crash and Ride is a long-form interview podcast where I talk to musicians who survived anxiety, depression, addiction, and abuse. I'm a professional musician. I play with Mike Mills from REM and his side project, the Mike Mills Concerto. I also play in the post-punk, post-hardcore band 5/8, and this year I've been touring heavily with the Japanese high-energy rock band Pinky Doodle Poodle. Speaking of that, Pinky Doodle Poodle, they came here from Japan. They're on a visa that expires on August 9th. We're filing for an extension. There's going to be some fees involved with that, and we're going to have a GoFundMe up if you want to help with that. I know a bunch of you have seen Pinky Doodle Poodle and had a great time, so I'd really appreciate any help you can give us with that. Last week's interview was with Riley Walker, and it went really, really well, I thought. I've gotten more feedback on that interview than any other I've ever done. I've picked up more listeners from that. If this is your second Crash and Ride, welcome back. If you haven't heard last week's episode, I highly recommend episode 19. My interview with Riley Walker was amazing. The messages I received via email, via comments on social media, on Twitter, has really affirmed my belief that what we're doing with this podcast is fairly important and necessary. So thank you to everybody who reached out, and thank you to everybody for listening and coming back. I'm home for a couple days from being on tour. I got out to Austin. I got to see my friend Thor Harris. That's 2 episodes ago. Episode 18 was with Thor. It was a really great interview. It was great to see his house and his army of hilarious dogs and just get to hang out for a while. Austin was fantastic. Dallas was really fantastic. It was good to be in Texas for a minute. So thanks everybody who came to the shows. While I was in Austin, I was contacted by the Sims Foundation. That's a nonprofit organization there that helps musicians with mental health needs. We have something very similar in Athens, Georgia called Nucci Space. I'm trying to compile a list of all these community resources that are available for musicians in towns where we sort of congregate, like Nashville, Los Angeles, New York, Chicago, Austin, and Athens. I think that it would be really useful because, the vagaries of the marketplace of for-profit healthcare leave a lot of us out in the cold when it comes to important things like not dying. So I'm going to see what I can do about getting some kind of list on our website for resources for people who are struggling. That said, I'd like to reiterate that if you're struggling with feelings of anxiety, depression, and you're contemplating self-harm, call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255. It's free, it's 24/7, it's confidential, it's staffed by volunteers who are trained to help you through your crisis. I can't recommend that enough. It's saved a lot of lives. Also, I recently discovered the Trans Lifeline's peer support line. That's a 24/7 toll-free number if you're a trans person struggling with dysphoria, with anxiety, depression. If you're having thoughts of self-harm, you can contact the Trans Lifeline's peer support line and speak to another person who's possibly been through what you're going through and can maybe help. And that number is 1-877-565-8860. So once again, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, 1-800-273-8255, and the Trans Lifeline's peer support line, 1-877-565-8860. Also, Crash and Ride is brought to you in part by Greer Amplification. Greer Amps builds the best boutique effects pedals available. If you're looking for an overdrive, boost, fuzz, compressor, or tremolo that is rugged, road-tested, and at home on stage, in the studio, or in your living room, Greer has a pedal for you. Nick and his staff strive to build the best products around with the best tone you've ever heard. They believe in their products, and they stand behind them too, backing each one up with a lifetime warranty to the original owner. Each Greer Amps product is hand-built in Athens, Georgia, USA. Go to www.greeramps.com or visit your favorite music retailer today. Crash and Ride is also brought to you in part by Jittery Joe's, a local coffee roaster based out of Athens, Georgia, USA. They have an espresso blend named after the podcast. You can get Crash and Ride Espresso on their website. It'll soon be available on our web store as soon as they get finished building that web store. They roast each batch by hand. That's delicious espresso, and I highly recommend it. It's my favorite espresso. That's www.jitteryjoes.com. So that's all the announcements I have. I want to tell you a little bit about this interview before we jump in. I did this interview in Buick and Jerry's kitchen in Nashville, Tennessee, the night after Pinky Doodle Poodle played a show there. And it's the first time I've ever sat down with 2 people instead of just one, and it was really good. They're such a good team as a couple, as a band. as interview subjects. They move as one mind, and I really like that about them. There's some technical limitations with my travel rig. I'm working on it. We just have stage mics, a couple of SM58s and AKG handheld mic. And at one point, their refrigerator comes on, and that's just part of the interview. You can hear the refrigerator humming in the background. We were sitting in their kitchen. But it was a beautiful sunny morning in Nashville, and we had a great conversation, some coffee, and I'm really happy with the way this interview came out. So all that said, let's jump into our interview with Friendship Commanders. All right, I'm here with Buick, Audra, and Jerry Rowe of the band Friendship Commanders here in Nashville, Tennessee. Welcome.
Hello.
Hey.
How are you?
My band Pinky Doodle Poodle played with Friendship Commanders in Asheville, North Carolina just a few weeks ago, and I was absolutely floored, as I've been very explicit about in several of the playlists I've made for the podcast since then.
Thank you, and likewise.
Thank you, pal.
And y'all are a duo.
Yes.
We are.
And a couple.
We are.
And was the couplehood before the band, or did being in a band preclude what happened first?
Years of couplehood before we started Friendship Commanders. I think we started the band about 5 years into being a couple.
And you both had other bands at that time? Before that?
I was doing solo artistry, but I have been in other bands. And Jerry, what were you doing? You were playing in another band in L.A. Jerry lived in L.A.
Well, that's true. Yeah. Well, the band started after I moved back, really, and that band had fallen apart already.
What band was that?
It was called Useless Keys.
I like that name a lot.
Yeah, we flirted with the Danger Bird situation and all that, but yeah, did not happen.
So flirtatious.
It was very flirtatious, very Silver Lake.
When you say Danger Bird, is that a label or?
That's the the Silver Sun pickups. People.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah, good people.
So you moved to LA with that band?
No, I just ended up there.
Yeah, and then that didn't work out, so you came back to Nashville.
I did.
And you're a Nashville native, right?
I am.
And you're from Miami, Buick, right?
I'm from Miami. And so the timeline is that I moved here from Brooklyn, New York in 2008. And when I met Jerry 6 months later, he was like, hey, nice to meet you. I'm moving to LA. And so he did. And he was there for 3 years, including the first year of our marriage, and then moved back. And then we started Friendship Commanders that next year. Cool. Just to bring you up to speed.
Yeah. My wife is also a performer.
Cool.
And she's a great singer and a great actor, but we've never really talked about working together, although it seems like it has certain advantages.
It does. I do want to say, and I say often, that it's also running a business together. People often comment on the creative aspect of working with your partner, but we also really run the business together now that we're a touring band and put records out. So it's an interesting dynamic to enter into. It's a lot of work.
That's the most dangerous thing, having the business kind of take over every conversation. You do have to figure out
every minute of the household.
Yeah. So I'm as a creative person married to another creative person, I have to tell you that my own experience is that even if you're not in a band together, money talks, especially when you're parenting.
Right.
It's not so unusual for those conversations to take over just because the kid is finally asleep and you can talk about things and it always comes back to money. So I wouldn't put too much regret about running a business, dominating so many conversations. I think that's just part of partnership.
It's good practice for the boundaries, though, too. Yeah. I mean, because we do, in times of really heavy, if we're not booking our own tours anymore, but for years we did, it would be like 9:15 p.m. and someone would be like, is there an opening band in Canton? It's more like that kind of stuff. And so now it's like we have practices around maybe after dinner, if we're not practicing tonight, no more band talk.
Let's just watch a movie.
Let's just be regular people in our house.
It's like coming home from work and Impaled Goat Satan had to drop off the bill, but this Blackened Sludge ska band is available.
I mean, these are actual conversations.
So Canton, Ohio?
Yeah.
Played there.
Yeah, Buzzbin?
Yeah, played the Buzzbin.
Played there a bunch.
Man, that club, of all the clubs in America that I've played that smelled like marijuana. That club had the strongest marijuana smell of any club I've ever played.
That's weird. I've never experienced that there.
Was the big room open yet? Was it the small stage still?
I can't speak to that because I don't know the difference. It was just a few months ago.
It's probably the big stage. It's changed quite a bit over the last 3 years. It's like expanded one full building width. I mean, it's been an interesting development.
And it's now owned by the band Night Goat.
We stayed with in a punk rock house in Canton with the kindest people I think I've ever met. Like incredibly kind people, and man, that house was not in good shape.
Yeah. We've been really lucky there, but yes, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Right. So that's another sort of aspect of touring with your spouse that I would wonder about. Like, so often I travel with a bedroll and a sleeping bag when I'm on tour, and I'm sort of the Lone Ranger out there in the middle of the living room floor. Do you guys often get to like be together at night, or
we also travel with bedrolls and pillows and all the stuff. Yeah. I mean, it just sort of depends on the night, but we do get hotel rooms for self-care and privacy because we have human needs, like as far as like actually getting rest, actually saving my voice. My voice is one of the instruments I use, so I can't stay up till 5 a.m. talking.
There's no aspect of the Friendship Commanders show where anybody's coasting. No, like when I watch you perform, it seems like your entire body is balanced on your toes, and I can't imagine having to sustain a singing voice at that level of intensity for an entire tour.
Yeah, right. So we try to know that and treat the bodies like the machines that are getting a lot of use that they are, and be careful. And also just emotionally speaking, it's great to be like, we're unplugging from other human beings for 7 hours.
Because sometimes those conversations, as we were discussing before we turned the machines on, sometimes you stay with people and they're like, it's a big rock and roll party. We're hanging out until dawn. And oh man.
We were talking with a friend of ours who plays in the band Mastodon about when you get to someone's house and you've been on the road and it's 3:40 in the morning and they're like getting out the records to start listening to vinyl.
Right.
And he said the worst is when it's your record.
Oh yeah.
And they want to tell you about the parts that you played.
Yeah. I don't think that particular thing has not happened to me. I do have a kind of funny story about that. This is such a digression. This may end up on the cutting room floor, but we stayed with a band in Austin called No Good Boyo, who would have probably been a great bill with Friendship Commander. They were super high energy, sort of this side, the punk side of metal. Like they were a cool band.
Cool.
But we played with them in Austin, and we went back to their enormous house where they were all living back when there were bands living in houses together in Austin before houses cost $1 million. And the party was just getting started when we got there. And there were people in I was just doing that shamble from room to room with my sleeping bag and my toothbrush. Just like, are there people in this room? Oh, God. Are there people in this room? Fuck. And so I ended up sleeping in a hammock.
Yeah, you did.
In the front yard. Yeah. Like I found this hammock and I went and laid down and I woke up in the blazing Austin sun like, oh God, my head. And I looked over and they lived next to a school or something. And there was like a trio of like 8-year-olds staring at me because apparently I'd been snoring. And
this is like the lost scene from 16 Candles from the party that Jake had.
It was kind of like that. I was like, oh God, touring is so glamorous. Yeah, so the first time I saw you play in Asheville a few weeks ago, I remember standing there at the stage thinking, as I watched you sing, Buick, I felt a like almost instant connection as someone who has had a fairly intense upbringing. Like I was like, oh, this is a person who has struggled to be seen in life and is now able to establish this real presence in the world with this enormous guitar rig. And as I mentioned, that your performance is not, there's no coasting there. This 110% kind of commitment to it. And that really pulled me into the music. And since then, I've kind of gone down the rabbit hole of your recorded work. And that's why I thought it'd be a good fit for this podcast about healing and about about kind of living through anxiety, depression, and addiction. And so I wanted to ask you some questions about that, but I also understand that you've got some fairly solid boundaries. So
one of my guitars is named Boundary. My boundaries are so solid. First of all, thank you for your kind words about watching us and listening to us. I really appreciate your ears and your support. And yes, I'm happy to answer any questions with boundaries.
Yeah. So you're from South Florida.
I'm from Miami.
Yeah.
And we Miamians do not identify as Floridians, but yes, we are.
I mean,
we actually don't. I think you'd be hard pressed to find a Miami native that identifies as being from Florida, because Miami has sort of seceded from Florida. But yes, I am from Miami, born and raised, and I'm from a very interesting time in Miami where it was lawless and dangerous, and it was easy to not have protections as a child.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I remember there was a period of time where the federal government was just piling refugees into basically open air enclosures in Miami.
Yes.
A lot of refugees from Haiti, a lot of people who left Cuba in the Marielito boat lift. And is this the time we're talking about?
Yeah, and it culturally was a very singular place to be a young person,
right.
You know. And also, I want to say that actually being from there, I didn't have anything else to compare it to. So to me, that was the world at the time. You know, it was such an isolating thing to be from Miami because we're in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. We don't have access to other stuff as kids. You know, you're just like, these people are my parents. This is the culture I'm from.
Right.
And I moved to Boston in high school and in parts of junior high and was like, what the hell is happening? You know,
that's such a big
culture?
Jump.
Yeah.
Did you feel unplugged? Like, did you?
Yes. Many different things happened when I went to Boston, but yes, I was like, where are all the people of color? That was and still remains a big question for me as a person from Miami.
I mean, there are people of color in Boston, but that's one of the most racially segregated cities I've ever been to in my life.
Thank you for saying that, because I say that almost every conversation about Boston, and there is a lot of pushback about that from people who are protective of that city, and I don't feel the need to protect that.
I mean, there's people from other parts of the country that love to talk about the racial strife in the South as if Chicago isn't an apartheid city with a very clear sectors, and the same with Boston.
I agree.
Yeah,
I agree. So yes, it was a big jump. I'm proud to be from Miami because it was and is such a strange place and such a sort of global hub. You know,
it is a really international city.
It is a really international city. We did not grow up with a sense of homophobia. I didn't even understand that concept until I moved to Boston, and Boston also has issues with that.
Yeah.
So I learned a lot in Boston.
Yeah.
I did a lot of unlearning in Boston.
Jerry, your childhood was here in Tennessee, though.
It was, in fact.
So pretty different.
It was very different.
Yeah.
You know, I grew up around Confederate flags, not really understanding what it meant. I mean, like, oh yeah, people just have those. And then, you know, as I grew up, I was like, oh, okay, that's what that means.
Well, I grew up around Confederate flags as a sort of working class Southern signifier.
Exactly.
It wasn't really weaponized until the 80s.
Yeah.
With the sort of, you know, Reagan launched his campaign in Philadelphia, Mississippi, a city famous for killing 3 civil rights workers who were down there to register voters in the 60s. Mm-hmm. And that didn't seem like an accident to anybody who was paying attention. And so prior to that, for me, the rebel flag was the thing that was on the roof of the Duke boys' car and the Dukes of Hazzard. It wasn't really a segregationist or racial weapon per se for us culturally. I'm a little older,
yeah.
But man, that came steaming back full force in the 80s.
Yeah, it was strange. There were. It was at times quite a bit more progressive and liberal back then, but it, you know, also that sort of underbelly, because we're only 45 minutes away from where Nathan Bedford Forrest was born.
Right.
That just existed.
If that.
Yeah, if that. It just existed the whole time. And looking back, I was around some pretty dark customers growing up. But, you know, I was always going to be an outsider. I got kicked out of Franklin Road Academy in pre-kindergarten, which was a Christian private school my grandparents sent me to, for saying that God didn't exist during Bible study.
Oh.
And so that's where I was.
Your grandparents, were your grandparents, were they your primary caregivers?
No, they kind of like steered the ship and had the money and were like, let's send him to this nice school.
Right.
Yeah.
And they were stable figures.
They were stable figures.
Yeah.
Man, my grandparents were my rock. I talk about that a lot on this show.
Yeah.
But yeah, they were amazing. But growing up in Nashville, were you sort of aware of it as an industry town, like a music industry town?
Oh, major. I mean, I'm third generation. My grandfather was a guitarist and songwriter, country singer. My dad's a bass player. I was a drummer at 1.5. My mom's a singer. Almost everyone I grew up around was a musician.
Your grandmother was also a singer with her own recording contracts when she was younger.
My grandmother had her own recording contract. She made a duets record. She sang backgrounds on a numerous amount of records, including Jerry Lee Lewis albums and all that.
I always feel like I should talk about Priscilla because no one does.
Because my grandmother was my favorite. She was wonderful.
Her name was Priscilla?
Yeah.
Sure was.
Really great.
Yeah. Prissy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So was there ever a moment where you were like, well, I'm maybe not going to play music my whole life?
Definitely not.
No.
That was pretty much it.
What about you? When did you start playing music?
My whole life as well. My parents are both songwriters, my biological parents. So I didn't realize that there were other jobs available. I just thought that music was what people did.
Yeah.
You know, and I have one sibling and he's the same. He's a drummer.
Where's he live?
He lives in Boston. And he is also a really cool songwriter and just musical thinker in general, but he was first a drummer and is professionally a drummer.
Right. He stayed in Boston then. You guys moved there together, you and your brother?
Yeah, we moved there the last time before my junior year of high school. Bowie's 3 years younger. His name's Bowie. Hey, Bo. And he has been there ever since I got out after college.
Yeah.
Yeah, I went running.
Where'd you go to college?
I went to Massachusetts College of Art, which is also abbreviated to MassAt in Boston.
Right.
Just is.
That's in Boston.
Oh yeah, it's part of that network of schools that are all about 45 feet from each other. So it's the Museum of Fine Arts School, Emerson, Berklee College of Music, the Boston Conservatory, the New England Conservatory. I mean, they're all literally within the same cluster of blocks, and you can take classes at each of them if you go to any of them.
What did you study while you were there?
I studied fine art. I was a fiber arts major.
Oh.
Yeah, so I did dyeing and print making and all sorts of interesting applications on fabric, and then I became a clothing designer in my 20s.
Wow.
Yeah.
And how did you end up in Nashville?
I ended up in Nashville because in the summer of 2007, I mastered a record, a solo record of mine out in Ojai, California with the great late Doug Sachs, mastering engineer. Mm-hmm. And the record was kind of an Americana singer-songwriter record. And he said, I'm going to put you in touch with some friends in Nashville, and I think you should go down there and hang out. And so I came down here the next week from Brooklyn to visit.
Right.
And then I stayed the summer.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And wrote a bunch of music and played a bunch of shows. Mm-hmm. And then went back to Brooklyn and was like trying to sort of get back into that life, and experienced a very significant breakup with my partner at the time. Oh. And it was a choice of either moving within the New York situation or moving away. So I moved here alone in April of 2008 and bought this house we're sitting in by myself.
I mean, there was a time when you could buy houses in Nashville for less than $100,000.
That was the time. And it was this house sat empty for 13 months before I bought it.
Wow.
So that was the market. And the economy collapsed a month after I bought this house.
Well,
an actual calendar month. True story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Nashville's no longer a place where you can buy a house for less than $100,000 for sure.
No, but because I bought this house, Friendship Commanders can tour and live like the musicians that we are. You know?
So you're doing Americana stuff at that time. Mm-hmm. And I know that just recently you did a thing here in Nashville as a singer-songwriter.
Yeah.
It seems like a lot of my friends who live and play in Nashville keep a sort of they have a kind of double life where they both do a sort of Americana thing that's a little more, I don't want to say mainstream, but it kind of exists within almost what would be. I'm trying to find a way to say this without sounding like a dick, but like there's a sort of straight thing they do with Americana stuff, sort of 3 chords and the truth, and then they have this other life where they do more confrontational, emotionally raw music. I see a lot of guys who log some hours at co-writes and stuff playing in punk bands at night, and I don't know if that's is that a conscious thing for you, or is...
Well, I only made Americana music when I didn't live here.
Right.
But that's the actual truth. I mean, I wouldn't qualify my solo music now as I've only played in Friendship Commanders for the last almost 7 years. Right. I haven't been doing both all along.
Right.
I put my solo music aside and really put her away, that person.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't afford to keep being her emotionally, to be perfectly frank. There were things that were very difficult in that season of making work that I could not continue to carry.
Right.
And so I stopped, and we started Friendship Commanders sort of around the next bend. But I come from rock music. My first bands were all heavy. Like, I'm not
Right.
first a singer-songwriter, second a punk rocker. I'm first a heavy musician.
Right.
But I also just write music all the time. So I decided to make this. I have a new solo record coming out, the first in almost 9 years.
Mm-hmm.
That is called Conversations with My Other Voice, and it is amends to who I used to be. That's what the record is.
Mm-hmm.
So it's making peace with the woman I put aside to be in Friendship Commanders.
So
it's not palatable at all.
do you...
I'm actually going to disagree and say that inadvertently, in a lot of ways, it's more directly accessible for normies.
Right, but it's not been something I've been doing all along and making accessible. Like, that was my first solo show in Nashville in 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
So I haven't been doing it alongside.
Would you describe your work before you came here as maybe more vulnerable? Because there's an emotional availability to the Friendship Commander show, but it's definitely at like
armor.
It's at a high level of energy, and
It's at people.
Right.
Well, and that was in reaction. That reaction is honest. I came by that honestly.
Yeah.
And it's also a reaction to living in Nashville and being a woman here and being absolutely unseen and unheard and made secondary to any man I'm standing next to, including Jerry, 100% of the time. So it seemed important to be a woman that made a big sound
Right.
and made statements that needed to be said loudly.
Mm-hmm.
But I wouldn't say that I was more vulnerable in my solo music. I would say that I'm honest about different things. So in Friendship Commanders, I really talk about my abuse survival, and I talk about being female, and I talk about what in the living hell friendship is, because I don't understand it, and I study it like a science. The Buick Audra music is more about like my relationships with my brother and people I've loved. It's a more tender and more frightening part of myself to access. It's the stuff that can kill me.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
No, I do. I'm just, there were so many things that you just said that I have other questions, like 100 questions are at the front of my mind right now.
I will chime in as an outsider and say aesthetically, I think inadvertently what he's getting at has happened in that you are a student of classic songwriting and like Blue-Eyed Soul and R&B stuff, and that's where this stuff sort of leans more directly. Like there are groovy songs on the record, there are like atmospheric songs. And
can you tell Jerry played on it?
And they live in a much more accessible place than Friendship Commanders does, because it's people are made uncomfortable by how confrontational it is. Because there's a guitar sound that sounds like it will cut your arms off happening, and
right.
There's a lot of intimacy in the Buick Audra music. I'll say that. So
yeah. I
think that I created Friendship Commanders to protect that woman.
Right.
I'll say that.
My wife, a joke around our house is that her third career after actor and college professor is that she's going to become a hitman or hit woman, because there's no one and this is the joke, there's no one more invisible in the world than a middle-aged woman. Like,
Yeah.
For just a woman.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, women are, especially in this part of the country, it's insane.
Yeah. Do you feel like in some ways that Friendship Commanders is the direct sort of challenge to kind of patriarchal values about women's roles?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I will not be attractive in that setting. I will not be feminine in that setting. I will not be soft. No. I absolutely will not be any of those things that
It's
are
funny.
championed for women.
I feel like maybe I'm speaking for Jerry a little bit when I say that, but in many ways you are all of those things in that setting if someone's willing to accept you on those terms.
Yes, thank you.
But yeah, if you're expecting some, Scarlett O'Hara type,
You're at the wrong show.
Right. So, you guys, y'all, I'm trying not to say you guys as much.
Y'all is great. Y'all needs to be
Third
everywhere.
person, gender neutral, inclusive. Yeah.
Yeah.
So y'all met here, and then you just immediately bailed out for LA.
Well, I had the, I'll let the cat out of the bag here because it makes the story work better. My grandfather was Jerry Reed.
Yes.
And he died 2 days before we met.
The night before.
The night before we met, and I had been in this swirl of keeping his death a secret from the press, so his funeral wouldn't be insane.
Right.
And
which was one of his requests.
Yeah, which is one of his requests. And it was one of the family requests, and it wasn't so much about amount of people. It was just weirdos, especially because he died of emphysema, so he was in dementia when he died. He promised things to people who actually expected it unreasonably.
Right.
And they would show up, whatever.
Celebrity is a weird drug.
Yeah, and so I had this quote-unquote showcase with this band I was playing with at the time, and it was at the basement. And I was like, I guess I'm going to cancel that show. And, of course, my grandmother, Priscilla, was like, that's the dumbest idea I've ever heard of. You're a musician. So I went and played it after the funeral. And she was there.
I was there.
And I really was not in any mood to meet anyone, but I just felt compelled to basically follow her around. And I asked her to come hang out with me at Family Wash afterwards because I was going to have a beer with my dad.
I love that bar so much.
The old Family Wash.
Do you guys know... Do y'all know Jordan Caress?
I know that name.
I don't.
Jordan, if I do know you, I'm sorry.
Well, Jordan lives in Boston now. She got sort of fed up, I think. I mean, I'm not close to her, but
fair.
I saw her perform at Family Wash with her brother on keys and a pedal steel player. And I was there almost by accident. I was up here with a friend who was doing a co-write on Music Row, and afterwards he said, this guy I know from Arkansas is performing at this place called Family Wash, and we went there and got food, and the pedal steel player was my buddy's friend, and Jordan came in and sat down and played a set of probably 45 minutes. Time stopped for me.
Yeah.
She's one of the most extraordinary songwriters and singers I've ever seen. And that night at Family Wash will always be one of my favorite Nashville experiences of all time. It was truly remarkable. But anyway,
that original venue was great, but
it was special.
Yeah, so we've basically been together ever since. But the interesting thing was I had these plans to move to LA for a long time because I'd lived here my whole life and I hated it here, and so it was permission to leave. And at the same time, I met Buick, and I guess we both thought we'd just break up, but it didn't really happen.
Yeah, we planned to break up.
Yeah.
We thought, well, we'll have a fling. I remember announcing that to my friends. I'm going to do it. I'm going to have a fling with someone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then here it's been 11 years.
And then I asked her to marry me, and then...
Tell me, where I mean, I don't want to pry too much, but where did that happen?
That happened. That happened as a last-minute idea when we were like laying down to go to sleep
In LA, I was visiting, and we were in pajamas.
She'd been hanging out. We went out to Hotel Cafe, and then I was just like, I think it's right.
And we were eating pizza in bed.
Yeah.
Oh, man, I love this story.
Yeah.
I was broke. The
romantics.
I was not in a good situation. She was here.
Everyone was broke.
Yeah, everyone was broke. The crash had happened. So I had decided to stay in LA and not tour, which meant I was playing 3 sets at Hotel Cafe a night for like $100, and it was really rough. And thank you to all my friends who gave me free food at all the local restaurants and bars in LA. I won't tell your bosses, but yeah.
And I was trying to get out of my record deal at the time, which was a complete nuclear nightmare.
Who Can we talk about what that was about?
I was signed to a record label by Joss Stone that she started.
Yeah.
And it was an absolute horror.
Mm-hmm.
And she,
yeah.
And that's how that went. And it was just the same record label story that everybody has in a sense, regardless of who and what. It's just when it's gone badly, but they still own the first right of refusal to everything that you're doing, and they have, and they're mean-spirited, and they have the option to sit on the music that you're creating, and you're in a prolific time, and you're recording and writing and playing, and yeah, it was terrible. It was a really stressful experience.
Yeah. That was that label's based out of Nashville? Or?
No, Joss is an English musician. So
I sort of know her name, but
she's out of Devon, England.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'd be here while she'd be stuck in rural England.
Yes,
Just
I'd be
hearing
working
about
over
what's
there,
happening.
and yeah, I mean we were really far apart for a lot of that relationship.
Yeah.
And just a quick aside, the first Christmas we ever spent together was 3 months after we were together. My grandmother took us all to Disney World because she didn't want to be here be at her house without her husband.
Post Jerry.
Right.
She was in England having a horrible time, and my grandmother was like, "Tell her to come to Disney World." So she flew to Florida from England. And
There's a lot in that story, yeah.
Yeah. It was kind of wonderful and perfect.
Yeah. Disney World, I have this weird relationship with it because it makes my daughter really happy, but I'm always just there thinking, this place is so expensive.
It's a capitalist nightmare, but I think
Right.
there is a part of it that human beings need. It's very valuable in times of need.
Yeah?
And
Also, I think it can be really inclusive. I think for kids with disabilities, they're great about, making things accessible to people who need to have access. And I mean, there are positives that can be said about it. I just want to say that, things that make way for people that don't have, perfect ableist bodies, like that's fantastic, and I support that. But yeah, it's a total, and I feel like that was such a Technicolor holiday because I was like having actual trauma, but here I was dating this man, and I was meeting his family at Disney. So the backdrop of that whole thing is like pretty
very funny.
Winter in rural England is pretty gray, like damp experience, and then winter in Florida is like summer in England. And
right. And I had been on Joss's work schedule was that we would start tracking at 4 or 5 p.m. and work through the night, which was a nightmare for me.
You're not a night person.
Well, I'm not singing at 6 a.m. person.
Right.
I mean, what a terrible time to record a song.
Right.
Like, when you've been up since the day before. But that's how Joss wanted to work. So that's how I'd been working for a month. So I was on, I think all of my body hurt, my mind hurt,
And then all of a sudden you just eject out of that situation to
onto
Disney
roller
World.
coasters.
Yeah.
Literally.
Sounds really pleasant, actually. Yeah. So you were in LA for 3 years.
Yeah,
And then you come back here.
I do.
And did you guys move in together immediately? This is a really personal question. I mean,
This is our life story in this interview.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we actually lived together right before I moved anyway. So it was great.
We were married by the time Jerry moved back. I feel like that should be said again. We were married the year before Jerry came back, so it seemed like a good idea to move in together, finally.
Yeah, like you're married. Yeah. And then how long did it take for you to decide, hey, we should be in a band together?
Well, the
like
band
6 months.
Yeah, 6 months, but it was also an accident.
It was an accident.
We owe it to someone we know named Greg Hagan for canceling on the gig last minute because we were just playing Buick Audra solo with a friend of ours named Tim Marks, who's a great bass player in town, on bass. And Greg canceled with a weird, vague finger injury or whatever. And then she was like, "I'll just play loud guitar. We'll play rock trio." And it kind of slowly morphed into Friendship Commanders.
And we cut some demos like that, just of my songs to see what it felt like. And then we've really been a band since that.
And it was that trio form for a while. It was way more pop punk at the beginning, and we've kind of come around to where we are now. And
yeah, it's gotten heavier.
It's got its own weird genre.
It does.
Like, I wouldn't call it metal, but I wouldn't say it's not metal.
Right. Yeah, I mean, our booking agent is a metal agent, yeah.
Who's your booking agent?
Aaron Gray with Heavy Talent. Hi, Aaron.
Up in Boston.
Yeah, up in Boston.
Cool.
Yeah.
So that was a question I had right in my head. It went right out again.
Is it about Disney?
No, just about the transition to being a duo.
That was also accidental. That was because a bassist. So at the time we were juggling bassists, and people would come out with us for a few days, like what you're doing with Pinky Doodle Poodle. Like they weren't like necessarily in the band, but there were 3 or 4 drummers that played, or bassists that played with us. And we had a show in, what's that place called? Radio Room in South Carolina, I want to say.
Yes.
Greenville.
Yes. So we had a show, like a one-off for some reason, or a weekend away or something, and no one could play with us. And I said, let's just do it. Let's just play like we play, and you'll play up front, and we'll just like blast it out, and I'll play at 11, you know? And it was immediately different. The dynamic between us was immediately different without that third person on stage sort of sucking up another bunch of energy and not being a member. That was a big deal, that the person wasn't really contributing creatively. They were just holding something else down.
Learning parts.
But being up front.
Right.
So there was like sort of an energy vacuum, even though all of those bassists were really great and are really great bassists. It just was like, because they weren't creatively invested in the work, it actually made a difference when they weren't there. And it suddenly got like much more brutal. The minute we became a duo, it got brutal.
Yeah, we had to fill up a lot more space.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you've talked a little bit in this about your trauma, and I know that affects intimacy. And Jerry, you seem to be one of those guys who's like, I have 2 formidable shoulders, and I can take these things on. Like, it seems like
Jerry just shrugged for the radio audience.
Yeah.
yeah. Those of you who can't see Jerry, he did just shrug.
Yeah.
But you said that you study friendship like a science, and that's part of what the band name came from.
Sort of, yeah. That's what. It's not what the band name came from, but it's what the band became.
Right.
You know, when we definitely are a band that writes about friendship. I write about friendship.
Right. Can you talk to me a little bit more about that? Like,
well, I've just not had a great time of it, is the long and short of it. I am a person who is seeking growth and seeking change, and it has been hard to maintain relationships with people who might not be on similar trajectories. I'm in recovery in Al-Anon. I do not represent Al-Anon or any 12-step program.
Right.
But I have been in recovery in Al-Anon for quite a long time now. And it does change. It has changed me. It has changed who I am. It has given me language around my feelings. It has given me language around boundaries and requests. And not everybody likes that. And so I've lost some really long-term and important, what I thought at the time were important relationships, and it has sent me searching for the meaning of friendship. And the Bill album that we are still touring on, and which we made with Steve Albini, is largely about what friendship might be.
Yeah, I think that, and feel free to jump in and tell me I'm projecting or something with this, but it seems to me that it's harder for women to form friendships, and especially in a strongly patriarchal part of the country like the one we live in, because there's just so much competition that's forced onto women by the nature of social interactions.
Yes.
You know? And the sort of concept of the frenemy, which I guess sort of sprang to prominence 6 or 7 years ago, always kind of horrified me, because men's friendships are different.
They sure are.
Is that part of what you're just sort of exploring on Bill?
Yes, it is. And I even have a song about that thing that you're talking about, that competitiveness between women. I have a song called Women to the Front, which a lot of people misunderstood as me saying, like, sort of the riot girl thing of like,
right, that's how I took it.
Women first. Women to the Front is actually a very sad and lonely piece about me being a woman out in the world, trying to stand next to other women, and playing festivals where literally every woman has walked out when we've taken the stage after standing and watching men play. 78% of our listener base is male. I do not get a lot of support from women in the world, and certainly not in music, certainly not my peers. And so I sort of have a let it begin with me policy about it. as lonely and sad as it sometimes feels, where I will just uniformly celebrate and support other people, other women in music, and non-binary people. But I don't often feel that is reciprocated. And I certainly don't have a lot of friendship or peership here in Nashville musically with women.
I mean, Nashville's got its own weird dynamic about performance and
gender.
Yeah, that's exactly the word I was looking for.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth noting that my dad, sorry for calling you out, Dad, and everybody around me would always be like, you can't date the chick you're making music with. And I'm living proof that's dumb and wrong.
Right.
And I see a lot of those relationships, and there were other things going on there, like having that mindset when you went into it. But
like being sexist in the first place.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of sort of tacit assumptions, I think, about women in performance, especially there's a strongly patriarchal culture in Nashville, not just because of the music being Appalachian in origin, but also there's like a bazillion performative Christians here between
1 bazillion approximately.
Yeah. Between Belmont College and this being the sort of ground zero for the praise and worship music scene.
100%.
Yeah. And, that's...
So much so that I can quite often relate to people who feel intensely othered simply because of my experience getting kicked out of a private school.
Yeah.
For saying I don't believe in
For
God.
being non-Christian.
Yeah, it was really hard. I was constantly told I was going to go to hell, or that I was just going to die in some horrible accident because God didn't love me, or whatever the deal was. That's, when you're a child, that's very toxic and abusive and awful.
Right.
Both my parents are like, that's horseshit. Those people are crazy. But
right.
They're right. But, still.
Yeah. You take those lessons on as a kid, though.
Yeah.
Well, what was it like recording with Steve Albini? What was your experience with that?
It ripped.
It really did rip. He's, and it was awesome hearing all the horror stories going in and having none of those experiences.
Yeah, shout out to everybody that thought it was appropriate to come up to us the minute that the recording session was announced and tell us negative stories that were 50th hand. You could have saved that, because that's also not appropriate. When people announce that they're having a baby, you don't say having babies is a nightmare. Don't say that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like if someone says they're making a record and they're excited about it, it's not necessary for you to wander up and be like, I heard that he's a nightmare. And a lot of men did that to us / to me.
Yeah. But on the subject at hand,
He ripped.
it was a great time.
I feel like there's a certain segment of the population that feel a certain ownership for Steve's work, which is weird to me because many of them haven't even recorded with Steve.
And they never are going to record with Steve or know him in any capacity.
Yeah.
Right. But I think that Steve's sort of iconoclastic sort of status as an outspoken critic of the record industry at large and many of the other aspects of sort of the commercialization of art kind of positions him as a sort of lightning rod for people who are sort of perpetually discontent.
Yeah.
And part of that discontent involves a lot of vocal criticism of things that they think suck.
Definitely.
But the thing is that Steve is he's an expert. That doesn't need to be said. He's an expert at what he does. He's an expert recording engineer. He's an expert with tape. He's an expert with sounds. He has expert ears. The end. I mean, that part of it is like, no one needs us to weigh in on that. I mean, that part is a pleasure.
Steve is. I sort of refer to him as an aficionado of everything.
Yes.
He's got a deep interest in tape and analog recording equipment, but I've recorded with him a couple of times, and we disappeared down these rabbit holes of like the whole Adobe Brick story about the live room, and about when I recorded with him, we spent 30 minutes talking about 3 different ways to catch fish without using fishing tackle.
Yeah, no, I know. I mean, he's smart, he's interested, he's engaging, he's really funny, he's really dry.
Right.
He's really feminist. So for everybody that thought it was appropriate to walk up to me and tell me what a dick Steve was or would be, or what a terrible idea it would be, I just want to say Steve is more feminist, in his regular dealings with a person than most people are, in their entire careers. I mean,
Right.
Steve made me feel listened to and heard and seen without any effort. It's not an effort for him to honor everybody in the project.
Right. That seems to be a sort of a theme in your art. This sort of desire to be acknowledged and seen.
Yeah, because I'm often not.
Yeah. Do you think that that's something that sort of got baked in from a very early age?
Oh yeah. I'm from a family that. Well, I have one sibling, and he's male. And he is very important to everybody in my family. And without breaking people's confidences, my brother has had a much more sort of, his highlight reel is different than mine. And he gets a lot of attention. And I am the other child, and I'm the other child in several ways. I also have a different father. So I was raised by my brother's father, but Bowie is actually his child biologically. I'm from something else. And I'm female. And I am a truth teller, and I have been since I was little. So when you come from, I'll just speak for myself, I come from a dysfunctional family that goes back many generations. So this is passed down behavior and attitudes and narratives. And they're all in agreement
Right.
about what the stories are. And I am not. So that's really difficult. And being a truth teller in a family of other kinds of people is very isolating.
Right.
Very lonely.
But so you and Jerry met when he was recovering from the death of his grandfather, and you felt seen immediately with him.
I don't know that I felt seen. No, I would not say that.
Yeah?
No, Jerry was a different animal back then.
I've changed a lot, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
Yeah. I've also, in that time, kind of come to terms with a lot of what's gone on in my family, which was not as good as I thought it was. So, I'm on a different side of things here.
Yeah.
I'll say, my grandfather, was a major celebrity and was a really big deal in town here.
Yeah.
It's definitely faded elsewhere. I'd say Georgia and Tennessee are probably where his most.
I was going to say, not where I live, but
Yeah.
I live in Georgia. So
most
from Georgia.
most remembered. But my family setup was very, very intensely patriarchal, including a bunch of people who were around until he died and disappeared as soon as he died. My grandmother was made a lot smaller by that. She's, a wonderful rock of a human being, very strong, very supportive, but it's a very classic Southern dynamic, and that's just here. It's all the dudes Waylon and Willie, and it's so tiring. And I was definitely part of it.
Right.
Yeah.
And man, I'm tired of hearing about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're both super tired
I'm
of hearing
so
about
over it.
Enough.
Yeah.
Please move on. I loved him. He was still a country celebrity, which also made him a fairly unavailable and self-absorbed man. He was just a man.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I talk about being seen and heard, I don't even necessarily mean as an individual, but I mean, I live in a place where white men to the front is
Right.
essentially the cultural motto. Any white man who did anything is more important than anybody else in Nashville.
Right.
I mean, that's just the truth.
It's super bougie, too.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I feel like maybe one of the reasons that Johnny Cash struggled for so long here was that he was eminently working class, and there was a kind of class exclusion thing that happened here. But eventually, of course, Johnny was acknowledged, where someone like, Rosetta Tharpe was never.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you made a record with Steve, that's Bill, and have you self-released it, or is it on a label?
I have a label, and
Yeah.
so we self-released it on Trimming the Shield Records that I run.
What's that name come from?
It comes from being a kid and watching my brother try to make a family crest in the second grade and staying in his room all night and then going in and realizing he had passed out, and all of the poster board had been trimmed down to the size of a postcard. It had been like an 18 by 24.
Right.
And he had trimmed it down in an effort to make it symmetrical. And he just kept and kept trimming until it disappeared. And it was a last minute effort, and so he didn't finish it. So I stayed up and remade it for him.
Right.
By the way, that sets a dynamic for the rest of your life. Careful. And so we actually started the label together when we were kids. So we called it Trimming the Shield because it's about procrastination.
Oh.
And perfectionism, which go hand in hand often.
Well, I mean, one of the things that I've realized through the course of doing this podcast is that ADD and depression and anxiety and procrastination are all different faces of the same monster, So that record's been out how long?
It came out in October of last year, and we're sitting here in July. So what does that mean? 8 months ago?
9 months.
9 months ago?
Yeah.
9 months ago?
Yeah.
I don't know. It feels, that record has been such a birth.
It both feels like yesterday and 3 years ago.
It does.
Does your bracelet say MYOB?
Yes, that stands for Mind Your Own Business.
Oh, I know what it stands for. I feel funny asking. It's like, what's your bracelet mean? It means exactly what you think it does.
Well, so it's actually, you'll notice that the letters are facing me. So I have a hard time. When someone's behavior freaks me out, part of my tendency is to want to know why they're behaving that way instead of just taking care of myself. So it is a reminder to myself to keep my eye on myself. But also it is a nod to the great Delta 5 and the song Mind Your Own Business, which I think is one of the greatest pieces of writing. Can I interfere in your crisis? No. Mind your own business.
Right. So there was a tweet like 6 months ago that I immediately shared with another artist who I love deeply, but it said, just because you had a dysfunctional and codependent upbringing doesn't mean that you have to take responsibility for the well-being and mood of every single person that you can actually lay eyes on. And that's something I have to work on.
Mind your own business.
Yeah.
I mean, also huge credit to Al-Anon. I mean, yeah, I just want to say, like, as wonderful as Jerry has been as a partner, and the tendency sometimes is for people to give credit to Jerry for me being okay. It's definitely not that. It's Al-Anon. It's working a program for steadily and relentlessly for 11 plus years. Al-Anon is a place where I have felt seen and heard and supported by strangers all over the world, and that's really a valuable thing for people that come from abusive dynamics.
So other than Al-Anon, I mean, what other sort of practices are you undertaking to kind of keep yourself?
That's it.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a million self-care practices that I've learned through the course of being in Al-Anon. And I did therapy as a much younger person because of my abuses and my traumas. So, and that was really important at the time to have an adult human, as a child, be like, no, you're right. This is happening.
Right.
Because part of dysfunction can sometimes be gaslighting, which my family has no shortage of. So I wasn't even clear that all of the things that were happening were in fact happening, because people would then tell me that they weren't happening, So, I mean, talk about a mind melt,
Yeah.
So it was really important to have an outside set of years, and someone to sort of to normalize it and say, yes, right. And this is what this is. When this happens, this is what they're doing,
Did you do meds?
No, I don't. I've actually been substance free my entire life, uniformly.
Right.
Of all kinds.
How do you take care of yourself, Jerry?
Well, I'd gone to numerous Al-Anon meetings, but I don't partake in a 12-step program.
Right.
So I do just kind of, I guess, go Hideo, as they say.
Go what?
Hideo, that old race car driver that wouldn't wear a helmet.
Oh.
Yeah.
I don't know that. That's a new one on me.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically it. I think 12-step is wonderful, and Al-Anon gave me a lot of information and tools to sort of navigate my familial situation, but I never went into the 12 steps or got a sponsor.
Right.
I think one day I'd like to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a lot of unpleasant work.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
At some point, you get to a point where you're like, I can't move forward without doing this work, and that's how you get the sort of steel in your bones it takes to actually dig in and deal with trauma and deal with resentments and deal with fear. But man, it's changed my life. So.
Well, I mean, I think I'm of the belief that Al-Anon should be taught in schools.
I mean, seriously.
Just like my family had some nuclear terrible shit, but I also work in an industry that's filled with crazy people, and being codependent is almost how you get the job done.
As a drummer?
Yeah, just being as a working drummer, and so it's like
you're like a midwife for other people's vision.
Yeah, so it's really, really important, and
And there's a ton of anxiety as you're trying to anticipate the needs of whoever you're working with.
Yeah.
As a freelance. I mean, the thing, my friends who work here as working musicians in Nashville, their lives are just absolutely eaten up with anxiety because they're just constantly waiting to get fired.
Yeah.
You know? And that's why I like bands so much more than hired gun situations.
You know, I will say the growth that I've just sort of almost co-opted from Buick, and I will say that, like, I've learned a lot from you and from others. They're not going to get fired. It's too expensive to fire somebody. Once I learned that, it's really like you don't matter that much in the grand scheme of things. It's actually really freeing. You know.
Yeah, you're not the center of the universe.
Yeah, no one's thinking about you the way that you are.
The great thing about Al-Anon is that it really, you know, like what he's saying, it really gives us resources for looking at our own responses to situations. So I used to, you know, when people hear about Al-Anon, they think like, oh, it's for people who know alcoholics. First of all, no one doesn't know alcoholics. I mean, we're all impacted by the disease of alcoholism somewhere on the spectrum. I mean, I don't see how it's in our culture. I don't see how it's not true. For me, it's about being like, oh, am I having a bunch of fears that may or may not be reasonable? Let's break it down.
Right.
You know, like what tools do I have to look at a scenario and honor what might be a valid fear, and then also look at the stuff that my mind is just generating to keep me spinning.
The thing they tell you about what fear stands for, false evidence appearing real.
Yeah, and I use that as like face everything and relax, because it's not all going to happen. You know what I mean?
Right.
Some of it is going to happen, and some of it has already happened, and we're still alive.
Right.
You know?
Right.
Most of what I have feared in my life has happened. It happened. And so there's a huge amount of strength in that for me, because I'm not sitting around waiting for everything to happen. It already did.
Right.
And we're still sitting here having bagels on Saturday morning.
Right.
We're all living through it. We've lived through it.
Right.
You know? So it's helpful to have tools to examine the thought processes and the belief systems and just unpack it a little bit instead of having it all sit in the knot of the gut full time, which is what it used to feel like for me.
Right. So I usually wind these interviews up with a series of 8 questions that are loosely based on the Bernard Pivot 10 questions that end the Inside the Actors Studio. You know those questions. I don't actually use those questions because I think that everybody's familiar enough with them. They have answers in place. So
and we've listened to your podcast, so we know what.
So you know what's coming.
Yeah, we do.
Well, let's jump in. The first question is, what's the fondest memory of a meal that you've had, that you have?
Fondest memory of a meal.
You go.
I mean, I'm looking at your Monty's Blue Plate Diner Cup, which we discussed before we turned the machine on.
I love Monty's Blue Plate Diner in Madison, Wisconsin.
That's one of my favorites.
Yes. And Patrick and I are each a vegan and a non-vegan, respectively.
Right. No, I was vegetarian when I went there the first time.
Oh, that's true. You did say that. But they do have food for all makes and models, which is wonderful.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, it's so much. I'm having such a hard time. Two things. There's an Indian restaurant in Victoria Island, Canada. It is Victoria Island, right? The city.
Oh, I don't know. I've never been to Victoria Island.
Victoria, or Victoria, Canada.
Yeah.
It's some of the best food I've ever had. But my favorite memory is in, I think, Tourcoing, France. After a gig, band I was playing with, instead of getting catering or like a buyout, we just went over to one of the people that worked at the venue's houses into their dining room at the top of the house, really long table, and we all had dinner.
That sounds amazing.
And it was incredible.
Lovely.
Yeah.
My answer to that question is also about touring in France. We just crossed the channel on the ferry thing, and we were starving, and we went to a diner. It was like a French equivalent of a Denny's, but it was such a great meal to be with friends and playing music and traveling and. Yeah.
I'm going to say Jerry and I got to stay at the Timberline Lodge a week before we made the record with Albini in November of 2017.
Where's the Timberline Lodge?
The Timberline Lodge is in Oregon, and it's the hotel that was used for the exterior shots in The Shining.
Oh.
Yeah, the Stanley was used for the interior. And the restaurant was fantastic, and they made me this big vegan spread that was like quite literally about 4 meals worth of food. But it was also so special to be in that building. For me, I grew up, I'm from a horror family, and I have written some music about horror. And so it was so exciting to be in that particular location, which is the warmest and kindest feeling building on the inside. It's all repurposed wood. It's just got all of this intention, but also has this history as doubling as a monster nightmare hotel.
An elevator full of blood.
Yeah, it was lovely. That's just my speed.
You have such a encyclopedic pop culture knowledge.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how many people could name both locations for The Shining.
That was an incredible meal, and they have a great.
It was
They have a great
incredible.
vegan plate.
And it was just really special to be there at all for me.
Yeah. A friend of mine was in France and is vegan and, spent many, many fruitless hours saying to wait staff, chicken is not vegan.
Yeah.
Cream sauce is not vegan, trying to be kind and patient about it. But he finally got to a restaurant in Paris and they were like, oh, you're vegan? Hold on. And came back with this plate that was extraordinary and vegan. And the chef came out and was like, do you like it? Is it good? He was so stoked to cook this enormous meal for vegans.
And that person was so thankful, I'm sure.
Still talks about it. Once a week it comes up.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
Yeah. The second question, tell me about a time that you were braver than you ever thought you could be.
You're looking at me.
Okay, so I'll be vulnerable. When we made the record with Albini, I had previously only recorded myself singing for about 7 years. I had been traumatized by a former collaborator for decades about my vocal pitch and performance capabilities. And so I stopped letting people record me. And
as a defensive measure.
Yeah, and just because I could, because it's the 2000s, and you can have a Pro Tools rig and just record yourself.
I'm looking over Jerry's shoulder into a room full
and
of
not be abused by anyone,
equipment.
right? We have the power to walk away from that.
Sure.
But we really felt like it was important to have that record recorded by someone else, and Steve is such a was at the top of the list for both of us. We really appreciate his work.
Right.
But I had to really get with myself before I started singing that record. I mean, get with my, every tool I had, everything that I know, I had to conjure and bring to the center of my person and not just respond to the shame and the fear and shut down and literally shut the session down.
Right.
And it involved telling Steve that I was afraid and sharing with him that I had some issues around it.
He's not known. His reputation is not as a nurturing person.
He was perfect.
But I know him on another level, other than his sort of media presence, and know that he's an incredibly human. He's at core, part of his acerbic nature and his caustic wit is about people being assholes. He's really impatient with that.
He sort of nodded quietly and listened to what I said. He just let me say it. And then he said, sounds like a dick, and he said, I'm familiar with that brand of abuse. He knew exactly what I was talking about. He said, I don't know why anybody's interested in that. And
I've seen it too, as an engineer.
And then he said, this was the pivotal thing. He said, I invite you to leave it here. Leave it here. Leave that shame and the fear here when you leave. And it really, Patrick's crying.
I'm not crying, you're crying.
Patrick, when I tell you that I will remember it as long as I live, I'm not making a small statement. It was, and I sang that record in 6 hours to tape, 13 songs.
Holy shit.
And we just ripped it. And I sometimes didn't listen back because I just decided that I was going to trust Steve and Jerry to hear what I was doing. And it changed my life. But I had to show up for it.
Yeah. Yeah, no shit.
This is a good segue into a sort of slightly off topic, something I wanted to say earlier when we were talking about people having bad experiences with Steve. I get protective of this sort of Nashville work ethic, the way of working, because a lot of people like to talk down about it. But that is exactly a major part of the reason why Steve liked working with us so much, I think. is we just knew what we were doing and we did it.
Right.
We knew who we were already.
Yeah.
Well, I think Steve has an impatience for foofery,
Yeah.
Like, you don't go into electrical and, I mean, I guess you probably could go in there and hang a bunch of scarves and light a bunch of incense and light, 40 votive candles instead of mood. But, like, I think that Steve's aesthetic more is to get in there and do the job you've been trained to do the thing.
But he was very gentle with my fear.
Yeah. And as an outsider, and just, making that record, he was more supportive than most people. Because he was without agenda.
Right.
Also, there's no personal agenda in there.
Right. Yeah.
So that was a long answer. I'm sorry. But
no, it was a perfect answer. What is the thing in your life that you've lost that you regret losing the most?
I don't think I regret losing anything.
Oh, my God. Are you kidding? I could recite One Art by Elizabeth Bishop right now. Well, obviously, I've lost friendships, and I don't know if I regret it, but I grieve it. I grieve it hard.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I always will.
Specific friendships with...
Yeah, I had a person that I considered my closest friend for 17 years, and she told me a couple years ago that it had not been so, that our dynamic had not been what I understood. And I wrote Horrify about it.
Yeah.
I'll backtrack and say, I regret that I spent so much time chasing down the traditional major label success and rock bands my heart wasn't in.
Mm-hmm. That's time that you don't get back. But a friend of mine he's a filmmaker, and we worked on a movie that never got made for 2 years. And at the end of it, I was really bitter that we couldn't find funding. And he said, "Man, there's no wasted work."
No.
Yeah, I mean, it brought me here, and I'm valuable for the friends I made. And the people I did it with, a lot of them are still my friends, and I love and respect them. I would never say anything shitty about them. But it was a lot of, the intent was wrong.
Yeah.
And it's not now, thankfully. But
right.
I'm probably only here because of those situations.
Right. Well,
yeah.
I mean, that's learning,
It is.
Yeah. Tell me a time you received an act of kindness from a stranger.
God, so many. Jerry, you go.
I'm sure there are others that are important, but I play drums that I will always have, made by a man named Johnny Craviato, who gave me a drum kit.
He sure did.
Those are not inexpensive drums.
No. I bought a lot of drums, but there were very specific large sizes that I was wanting.
Mm-hmm.
And he and I really just, I guess, had a thing, and he really cared about what I was doing. He loved our band, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Came and saw us in L.A.
Is he passed on now?
He has passed. But
years ago.
He gave me some drums that he made personally for me.
Wow. That's remarkable.
He also, my brother is a drummer, as I mentioned earlier, and I had told him that my brother played birch drums, and Johnny made Bowie a birch snare, and they just sent it to Bowie. He did not know who Bowie was. He did not know anything about his work, or it was not a professional. He made him a snare and signed it and sent it to him.
That's phenomenal.
Before he died, yeah.
I love birch drums.
Yeah.
They're pre-EQ'd. They have this great meaty thickness, but also
they're kind of the best. It seems like people are realizing that now. But
yeah. So what are the sizes of the kit that you got from Johnny?
I got a 16 by 10 rack tom.
Wow.
A 26 by 14 kick drum.
Yeah.
And a 20 by 16 floor tom.
That is a massive kit.
Yeah, and I have a 14 and a 16 to match with it now. But yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's your favorite place to gig?
I would say the whole West Coast.
Yeah, we love the West Coast.
Yeah.
It's hard to pick a place in the West Coast. But yeah.
I guess. God, we're terrible at answering questions. What is wrong with us?
But also, we love, which is funny to say it. You know, I went through Texas touring with country acts, and it was horrible. But going through Texas with rock bands has been wonderful.
I do love Houston.
What do you think the difference was?
I think probably the culture that you're in when you're there.
Mm-hmm.
Best vegan food we've ever had in Texas.
Where was that? That's unexpected. Since it's
Dallas, San Antonio, Houston, they all have great,
incredible vegan
multiple very good vegan restaurants.
Yeah, I'm gonna say Houston.
Yeah,
for me,
Houston's kind of like a home away from home in a lot of ways. It's very weird.
What's the club there?
Well, we just played Rudyard's, which was great. We've played a bunch of different places in Houston, but Rudyard's was super fun.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Houston actually seems to have a scene that supports itself.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, Houston.
And others.
I didn't realize until I watched the Anthony Bourdain episode on Houston and what an international city it is.
Yeah.
Like, there's a huge South Asian population there, a huge Caribbean population. Like, it's a huge Vietnamese population. It's this massive international city.
Yeah, I mean, I'm an uncomfortable person by default, and I'm comfortable there. So
interesting.
I'm going to say that. And they have palm trees, which is incredibly important to me.
Because of your childhood was in.
Yeah, they just make me feel better.
Yeah.
And we don't have them here. Nashville is landlocked for anyone who doesn't know.
Yeah, right. But even outside of Houston, San Antonio, we've had very strangely like brotherly experiences with people there.
A lot of camaraderie. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting.
So visa and income considerations aside, if you could live anywhere in the world, where would you live?
For me, that's Norway, without even thinking about it.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Oslo, the city? In the city?
Bergen.
Yeah?
Yeah, anywhere in Norway. I love Norway.
I mean, I sort of feel like I would like to go back to Miami at some point. I have lived away from there for all of my adulthood, and I would love to go back now that it supports itself. You know, Miami Beach and all that used to be run down when I was a kid.
Right.
It wasn't reopened until the 90s, but yeah, I would go back to Miami for a time. I'm sort of, I'm like my mother. I feel nomadic.
Mm-hmm. Your mom moved a lot?
We moved every year of my life.
Wow.
I went to 5 high schools.
That's kind of brutal.
I don't know if it is or it isn't. I think there are positives to it, one of which was that I always had to bring myself to the situation. And as a person that grew up to be a freelancer, it can't have hurt that, you know? Like, I sort of know how to adapt to what is, but also be authentic. And I would have to imagine that started with having to start over every year.
Jesus.
Yeah.
So, do you have a perfect musical instrument? If you do you own it already?
Yes, I love those Gibson Nighthawks that I play in Friendship Commanders, which are weird guitars, and I found them accidentally. But I've recently, since I've been making this new Buick Audra record and playing a little bit live as myself without the band, I've been playing my other guitars. I've been playing my 1969 SG, which is named Boundary. And she's lovely, and I played her for a long time before I started FC. But man, those Nighthawks, there's nothing like them.
They've got that slant pickup, right? Is that?
Yeah, some of them do. So they have different pickup configurations, but yeah, I have the 3 pickup models. Both of mine are 1995 specials with the 3 pickups.
What's the neck like on those?
It's a Fender scale neck, actually, on a Gibson.
Interesting.
Yes, it is interesting. So they're weirdly substantial, but also then the body's very small.
Is that part of why they appeal to you so much?
I don't know. They just feel like they're on my side.
Yeah, that's nice. There's only 2 of you on stage. It's nice to have some other allies.
You might as well have some support.
Right. But the other day you played that Gretsch guitar. You were talking about it on social media.
I did. I played a Gretsch. I played a 1958 Gretsch 6120, which is a Chet Atkins model. I think it has like 100 names. Chet Atkins, Nashville, something or other.
Right.
You know, it's 6120.
Right.
And I played it for a performance of one of my solo songs on a show called Fret Buzz, and it was cool. It was the body felt enormous, but the neck felt exactly right.
Right. There's a band here called Smoking Flowers that we played with in Atlanta.
Yeah, we know the Collins.
Another duo, another married couple.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He's my favorite guitar player in the world right now.
Oh.
He was playing that Gretsch through a Bandmaster, and or was it a Bassman? Now I can't remember. I think it was a Bassman, and it was just magical. The way he used the trim, the way he used those Filtertron pickups, the way that guitar sounded. Like, he's not a flashy player, but he just kept playing the right thing over and over.
Yeah.
And, man, it's so great.
Scott's a good dude.
His brother is who I was playing with when
The night that we
we
met.
met.
No kidding.
Justin
Justin.
Collins. Yeah.
That's a small town, isn't it?
Yeah, he's got more of a surf garage punk thing going.
And a great voice.
Man, I love the way he plays guitar. Do you have a perfect instrument, Jerry?
No.
Yeah.
I'm not supposed to say that as someone who endorses Craviato drums. They're great.
Mm-hmm.
They are the most versatile all around, but I can't really say there's one instrument I would bring everywhere.
Yeah.
In this band,
Jerry
I-
also plays bass. I just wanted
Yeah.
to chime in and say.
and if I was going off bass, it'd just be P bass. You can't go wrong.
Right, the joke, like when you meet a bass player. Like,
Yeah.
So what kind of Fender bass do you play?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. But I mean, right now I love Tama Superstars from the early '80s for our band.
I mean,
Yes.
outstanding drums.
Yeah,
That was the drum they were trying to kill the American drum industry with.
they could have succeeded it. They kept up with it.
Yeah.
Now
those
they're
are-
the bargain drums of Tama. Like, what are you doing? But anyway,
Right.
you know.
I always tell people when they're looking for a bargain set of drums, if they're trying to get something to start playing and they want something that sounds good, is any lacquer Tama drums before 1999.
Yeah. Well, those are super costly now. They've
Yeah.
jumped up big time.
No.
So have the Nighthawks since I started playing them.
Yeah.
They just
Yeah.
went vintage.
No. It happens.
Mm-hmm.
An 8-inch Tama, one of those costs like $500 now.
What?
Yeah. So.
That's wild.
Yeah.
So last question. If you could imagine, this is kind of a funny phrasing for a question, but I'm still working on it. If you could imagine a taxi that could go anywhere, and I mean sort of not restricted by time or space as we know it, and you get in and you said to the driver, hey man, take me home. Where's the taxi going to take you?
I'm a little bit of an orphan of the world, so I don't know, but I would zoom right over to London in 1977 and shake Polly Styrene's hand and thank her for changing the world.
Yeah.
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 You know, it's probably heavy. It's probably a bit saccharine and cheesy to say that I feel like I don't know where it is yet because I haven't gotten there, but I feel like it's actually my future.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jerry.
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, my childhood was really rough too. It was not fun. Anyone who's a Nashville native, like I am, feels like a man without a country at this point in time.
Yeah, Nashville's changed a lot.
Yeah, it's awful. It sucks.
It is awful.
But
It's weird, isn't it?
yeah,
Everything's expensive. Like I texted a friend of mine yesterday, like, "Oh, I just paid $6 for a nice coffee. I must be in Nashville."
Yeah.
yeah. Somebody was like, "You look like you're from here" the other day, and I said, "Why is that?" I was like, "Oh, you have sort of like a. Don't take this the wrong way. There's sort of like a wariness about you, and like you just you see everything." I'm like, "Yeah, that's the thing. Everybody I know is like me. Is just kind of like hanging out, waiting for whatever the next bad thing to happen here is."
Yeah, I wonder if there's going to be a time when the whole like tide of $2 donuts just washes back out to sea, like this whole huge influx of people who are like really convinced of their specialness.
Well, yeah. So in my situation, I think my future is this. I'm in a band that I feel like there's a lot of forward momentum and energy around. Playing Buick's great songs.
Mm-hmm.
In a band with a very progressive, smart, bright female songwriter, guitarist, vocalist. And I am a product of a nightmarishly southern white patriarchal system that I would love to see turned on its head. I don't think it's going to happen in the way that a lot of people are saying it's going to happen, because it's like a lot of modern music coming out of town is just a new version of the same old thing rebranded for a larger audience. But
I mean, I think if we're waiting for capitalism to save us, we may wait for a really long time.
Right.
But I'm happy to be a part of whatever it is, a secret agent in the industry here, but also maybe getting out in my own way with this product that is spearheaded by this this woman right here. So, I'm happy to turn things on its head and fight for my hometown's great, if not intensely problematic history, and make a new one.
Right.
It's a pleasure to play with you, Jer.
Likewise.
I'm really grateful that you guys were able to do this.
Thanks for having
I
us.
think it's been really good.
Thanks for your work.
Oh, thank you.
Conversation is important.
Well, I really feel like people need to feel like they're seen,
Yeah.
I think it's really hard for a lot of people to feel quite so isolated, and then to find out, because part of being a professional musician is not showing your vulnerability because you're worried about how it's going to affect your marketability as a player.
Yep.
And that's
I'll jump in and say I've been a loudmouth, anti-religious liberal here in town, and I'm doing great. It doesn't matter. Well, as long as you're respectful and a good person.
I think there's an element of like, they tell us not to don't stand up and show yourself because you won't work. But I think that like that's just someone's way of telling you to shut up.
The only people I admire throughout history in the arts are the people who did just that.
Right.
The only people I admire.
Right.
They're
it's
the
a
ones
short list.
And they're the ones who seem to really go big.
Right.
Not that should be the goal, but like.
But I mean, really, the ones that have allowed themselves to be seen and known have been the ones that have saved my life at different points.
Right. Well, I think, you hear about the bands where people are like, well, they didn't sell a ton of records, but everybody who bought one of their records started a band.
Yep.
I'd rather be one of the latter
than
one of the former. So.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, you guys. It's been great.
Thanks,
Thank you.
All right, so that's the Crash and Ride interview with Friendship Commanders. I really enjoyed hanging out with them and really enjoyed this interview. Thanks for listening. If you want to reach the podcast, just email crashandride@protonmail.com. It's exactly like it sounds, crashandride@protonmail.com. That email is confidential. It's encrypted. Nobody reads it but me, so feel free to reach out, and I'll protect your anonymity at all costs. I won't use your name on the air unless you give me explicit permission to. There'll be a new episode next week. They come out every Saturday at midnight. Make sure you check our social media accounts for our playlist each week. I feature the band that I'm interviewing, plus any other work that artist has done, and future and past guests of the show, and bands that my other bands have played with on the road. So tune in for that. Remember, if you're having thoughts of self-harm, if you're struggling with anxiety and depression and you need some help, you can always call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255. That's 1-800-273-8255. Also, if you're a trans person struggling with anxiety, dysphoria, depression, sadness, feelings of not fitting in anywhere, there's a trans lifeline peer support line, 1-877-565-8860. You'll talk to someone who's probably been through what you've been through, and it's got to help. 1-877-565-8860. Thanks for listening. Thanks for all your positive feedback. Thanks for sharing the podcast on social media. I'm super grateful for all of that. In the meantime, take care of yourself. Be kind to yourself. Support local music. Go see your favorite band. And remember that loud guitars save lives.